So tonight, looking at our next section of Joshua, we're looking at Joshua chapter 5. So if you want to open your Bible with me, Joshua chapter 5, but we're only going to be looking at the first 12 verses. We'll be looking at those last few verses with next week in the conquest of Jericho. But this week, we're looking at Joshua chapter 5, verses 1 through 12, which says, Now, when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over, their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites in Galbath Haraloth. Now, this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the desert on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the desert during the journey from Egypt had not. Verse 6. The Israelites had moved about in the desert 40 years until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land that he had solemnly promised their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their places, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. When the Lord said to Joshua, Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. Verse 10. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal, on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate from the produce of Canaan. So, just to do a little bit of a recap, just a review of what we have seen in the previous chapters. So, Joshua has taken over as the commander of the Israelites, and the Israelites pledged their allegiance to him. Um, Joshua sent a couple spies to take a look at the land of Jericho to see what the land is like, just to see what their morale is like, any weaknesses or anything like that. And last week we looked at how the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River on even though the Jordan was in the flood stage, the waters were stopped when the Ark of the Covenant was in the middle of the river, the waters stopped flowing. The water or the river became dry, and the Israelites were able to cross over the river on dry ground. So now, which leads us here today. We're talking about Joshua chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. In verse 1, we see that the Israelites are finally in the promised land. They have finally have reached the destination they've been wanting to get to for so many years. And when they got there, they found out that the enemies, all the Canaanites, the Amorites, they were afraid of what was to come. See, we see at the end of verse 5 that, or I'm sorry, the end of verse 1, that these people have already heard of what happened to the Jordan River. I'll just mention this, I'll read this one more time. So all of verse 1, it says, Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan And all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over. Their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. See, this is just like what we saw with the spies when they went into Jericho. They found out that the hearts of these enemies, the enemies of the Israelites, had melted. There was no courage left. There was so much fear over what had happened with everything that happened with the parting of the Red Sea and everything going on with the battles during the 40 years in the wilderness and now. And these people knew that the Israelites are coming and they are afraid. And now looking at verses 2 through 9, we see the circumcision of this new nation. See, God gave the order for all these people to be, these men to be circumcised because they weren't circumcised in the wilderness. They weren't circumcised beforehand. See, this is a renewal of the covenant that God had with the Israelites. So just a little bit of a recap of what this covenant is. This is the Abrahamic covenant, which we see this in Genesis chapter 12, where Abraham had a covenant with God, where God said to Abraham that he will make his nation great. He'll be the father of many nations. Abraham will be the father of many nations, and that his blessing was going to be through Isaac, his son. Because remember, Abraham, we see that there were two sons that Abraham had. So we see Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was the son of his wife's mistress. It was Abraham's mistress, his wife's maid helper. And so Abraham was with her and then bore Ishmael. And then later on, Abraham had a son with Sarah, his wife, Isaac. And then God said that Abraham's blessing will be through Isaac. And so this is a renewal of that covenant. And we see that circumcision was the sign of the covenant. We see that in Genesis 17, where God told Abraham that the sign of this covenant will be that the men are circumcised. Now, what was so interesting about circumcision? People today almost see that this was meant that because they are circumcised, they are now believers. That doesn't make them believers. See, because you are circumcised does not make you Jewish. See, we see people today that say, well, I'm going to get baptized so I can go to heaven because I got to get baptized in order to get saved. No, that's not how it works. People today even baptize infants because of the belief that baptism is so important that you have to do it in order to get saved. That doesn't do it either. It's a baby. Just because you get the baby wet does not mean that the baby will go to heaven. People have said, well, baptism has to be, you have to have certain type of water. You got to have someone pray over it a certain way in order for the person to go to heaven. No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter what type of person prays over the water. No one has magical powers to turn water into, well, holy water. There's no way that happens. In fact, there's a pastor, a friend of mine, when their church does baptism, he makes it very well known that there's nothing special about the water, that it even came out of a hose. There's nothing special about it. And this was something that we see here. We see that because people get circumcised does not mean that they are now Jews. See, they were already Jewish beforehand. They believed in God. They had faith in God. See, the action doesn't make you saved. It's the heart that makes you saved. In fact, we see this in Romans chapter 2, where Paul even talks about that the inward circumcision is more important than the outward circumcision. You see, It doesn't matter if you are circumcised, but what matters is something inward. It's about your heart. All right, because if it's about the works you do, if it's all about just getting baptized, or in this time, if you just got circumcised, if that's what it was truly about, then there is no point to anything else. There was no point to anything else. All people would just do, just get baptized. Now I'm going to heaven. But no, that would be a saved by works religion. Christianity is a saved by faith, or saved by grace, faith. This is a relationship with Christ. So the circumcision was meant to be a sign of the covenant. We see this in Genesis chapter 12. I'm sorry, Genesis chapter 17. So the circumcision, the sign came after the blessing of Abraham. See, the blessing came in Genesis 12. Then the requirement of circumcision came in Genesis 17. And then as we move on to the next section, we see in Joshua chapter 5, verses 10 through 12, we see that the Israelites have Passover. This is the third time that the Passover has been celebrated. The first time was back in Egypt in Exodus chapter 12 during those 10 plagues. The second was at Mount Sinai before the Israelites broke camp, and we can see that in Numbers chapter 9. Third time is right now. They are having Passover in celebration over what has happened, praising God, praising the Lord after freeing them from Egypt. But also we see that the manna has stopped coming from the sky. Because if you remember, when the Israelites were in the wilderness, God gave them manna to eat that came from the sky. But that has stopped now because they are now in a land where they're able to eat from the land. They're able to eat what is around them. They weren't really able to do a whole lot when they were in the wilderness. God provided manna for them. He provided water. So God provided everything. But now God's still providing them the land. Remember, this is a land flowing with milk and honey. But there's no need for God to have manna fall from the sky anymore. We also see that this land, Gilgal. Now, what does the word Gilgal mean? Gilgal means rolled away. It's what is being rolled away now? What's being rolled away is the reproach from Egypt. I'm going a little bit of a backtrack here, so sorry about that. But we see this in verse 9 of chapter 5, which says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. Now, what is being rolled away? It's the reproach. Some translations might use the word disgrace instead. See, Gilgal means circle. Now, or like roll, or that type of like adjective, just being circled or rolled away. Now, what is being rolled away? Their disgrace, the slavery, the hardship of being in Egypt. They are no longer bound by that anymore. The Lord has rolled that away. Now, what is the application for tonight? Simply, we need to put God first in all that we do. Because remember, see, tonight we see two different examples of putting God first. See, people today believe that we must be baptized and do the Lord's Prayer or do the Lord's Supper in order to get into heaven. And here we see circumcision and Passover, which those are the two same things today. If you remember the Lord's Supper, it was during Passover. It is the Passover meal, unleavened bread and the cup. Some people say it was wine, some people do grape juice, but I mean, we can talk about that another time. That's not for tonight. So, but we see that we need to put God first. It doesn't matter about the works that we do. It's about giving God the praise. We see the people here, they have seen so many miraculous things. God provided them food. God provided them a way across the Jordan River. And one that's so unique. Like, and so something like that probably only happened twice in our lifetime, in their lifetime. Actually, only happened once in their lifetime because none of them saw the parting of the Red Sea. But it happened in the generation beforehand. And now they are finally at the land that God had promised them. So why not give praise to God that they are finally there? And the fact that they were able to eat off the land just is another assurance of what God said, that they were going to be in a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm sorry. We need to put God first in all we do. We need to give him praise, not because we have to, because we want to. Why not give him praise? He provided everything that the Israelites needed, and he's provided everything that we've needed too. So why not give God all the praise in all we do? Let us pray.